and the starches that are in grains. The makeup of what you're feeding it is completely different. And you know that even if you look at them, they're totally different. So what was your addition to that?
Oh, my other question is, where does kombucha?
Kombucha is a separate kind of fungus.
Well, it says it's yeast because it's the little scopy thing, the little mushroom thing, so it's a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast.
Yeah. And that, like I said, there are so many different kinds of yeasts. That one it's different at a more biological level, but it's not quite the same. I don't believe you could use kombucha to break down dough.
Okay.
So.
Anecdotally, for me, between kefir and kombucha, I don't have the stomach problem. And I didn't think I really had it that bad, but I was living on Tums and stuff like that, and now I don't.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of, we're finding now as people are, it's so hard for me to not like really go off on tangents because there's things that I'm really passionate about, but especially after the Great Depression, even though it was a difficult time in American history, it was very critical because it forced people to go back to their home gardens. It forced people to go back to this principle of self-reliance because there was no one to take care of them anymore. The Industrial Revolution with the food, you couldn't get food unless you grew it yourself. And so in some ways, I mean, obviously a lot of people suffered greatly, but it was kind of a reboot to our society in a way because people were forced to go back to gardening, to a lot of these things that had begun to be lost in our society. And then you got World War II, and a lot of people had their victory gardens and were doing their own growing. But then when the war was over, that's when we went right back, rushing into produced food, into commercially available food. And we went right back off that again. So what we're discovering is that as the generations have come down from those home gardening families, we've begun to get more and more and more sick, more intolerant to the foods that we're trying to give ourselves. So while the first generation down, maybe nobody was bothered by commercial yeast, but that was because their systems were stronger, they had been fed on other things. But then our bodies have pain memory. Our bodies are trained to recognize when we're hurting our bodies. So the classic example that I use is there's a particular food chain, and I won't name it. I have gotten food poisoning 3 times at that place. And I cannot so much as see that little logo in a magazine without feeling like I'm going to start dry heaving. My body has that memory, that pain memory of those awful experiences. Our bodies have that same memory. There's also a book that's very interesting if you are interested in how the body heals itself. Some theories on that. There's a book called Spontaneous Healing. And he can be a little far out there sometimes, but I like a lot of his principles. But he's a doctor, and he talks about how the body repairs itself at the DNA level. Your body, it unzips the DNA, and it is constantly repairing and learning and coding in new data. It's constantly learning and growing. So, as our bodies are recording this pain memory, we're passing that down to new generations, and their bodies are recognizing this attacker and just setting up red flags right from the beginning. So let's move to the next part of the question, which was soaking the wheat. Okay, so her question is if I advocate soaking the wheat and then drying it and then grinding it. My off-the-cuff answer is no. Because who in the world is going to have time for that? It really becomes unnecessary. When you're using the naturally yeasted starter, if you don't have time to do a starter, then that's probably, really that would be the next very best thing, would be to sprout your grains, dry them, dehydrate them, and then grind them. With the starter, you don't have to take that time, because basically, you're getting it to that critical period where it switches from seed to Plant Factory and letting things be available. So, you know, with the starter, I don't have to take that extra step. So. If you don't have a starter, if you're just going to be making whole wheat, then that would be a way to counteract a lot of the other things. But here's the other thing is, the organisms that are in here, now most people know that most life has a kill temperature of about 140 degrees, right? So people always say, well, so how does that work though? How do you get all those beneficial organisms in your system if when you bake it, you kill everything? So how does that work? And the answer is that yeast and lactobacilli both reproduce by either budding, where they grow a little bud off of themselves and create a cluster, or they send out spores. So they notice when they're in mortal peril, they send out these little spores, they die themselves, but then when the environment is again hospitable, those spores hatch. So what happens is with your bread, you take the dough and it's got all these happy living organisms in there, right? You put it into the oven, gets to a certain temperature, they recognize they're going to die, they send out the spores, they perish. When your bread cools, this whole new colony of organisms comes to life inside of your bread. It's really the most amazing thing, and I'll get to you in just one second. I discovered this when somebody had asked me that question and I didn't have an answer. And I had a loaf of bread that was about 10 days old. I found it in the back of the cupboard. And that's another great thing is this bread, because it is an acidic environment, it will not go moldy like commercially yeasted bread as quickly. So I pulled out this bread and I'm like, oh, it's still good. I'll just eat some. I'm out of bread anyway. Cut myself a slice, took a bite, and realized that the bread tasted the way my starter smells when it's hungry, when the organisms have used up all their food and need to be fed. And I had this and I talk about this in the cookbook, I'm sure you read that part, but I had this total bread geek moment where I'm in my kitchen, I felt like Frankenstein, like Dr. Frankenstein, I was like, you're alive! And it's the truth, and that's one thing I do stress to people, as you are making this bread, you are baking with living organisms. Hey, we're going to get some bread passing around. Remember, contains wheat. Also produced in a home kitchen that also manufactures things made with dairy, soy, nuts. Trying to be a label here. It's not really working out, but just so you know. Oh darn. I told you. I get derailed and so here's the thing, is that you're baking with something that is living. And your bread will also be living. Because of that, the longer that you have your bread, the flavor will change. The texture will change. If it's just a matter of 5 days, you won't notice much difference. If you're a smaller family, if it's just you and your husband, and a loaf of bread lasts you much longer, I recommend to people that they keep their naturally yeasted bread in the fridge, because that slows the organisms down. I gotta check my time here. Okay, we're doing good. Sorry, really quick, let me do that one first.
You answered my question. I was going to say, is that why natural yeast breads do not go bad as fast? Do not hold as fast?
Yes, and that's why. So you just have to know that as you're making this bread, it will have one flavor over the first, 3 to 5 days that you have it. After that, the texture will start to get a little bit more dry, and the flavor will become stronger because everything's still alive in there. Oh wait, sorry, I got to do this one first over here. Yes.
Okay, my first attempt failed drastically, but I got 2 bricks, 2 nice little bricks. We tried eating it. It was very, very sour, but it did go moldy. So what went wrong there?
How long before it went moldy?
About 4 or 5 days.
So one thing that could be a factor with that is with a brick, you've got super condensed material, and a lot of times the brick, the middle is still very wet. It doesn't have a chance to really dry out in the same way. So the excess moisture can sometimes cause that problem if you've got a brick. But usually with a naturally yeasted bread,